Welcome to the Black Gems Dive-In Podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into conversations about inclusive cultures and everything DEI. Your co-hosts are Kua and Kendra, and we're thrilled to be your hosts as we explore the crucial topics shaping our workplaces and communities today. In each episode, we'll unpack insights, share stories, and engage with experts to foster a deeper understanding of how we can create more inclusive environments where everyone feels valued and empowered.
Hey, Kua.
Hey, Kendra.
What's up? I don't know why we always be so awkward with it. Like, we haven't just finished talking.
What's up?
I know. What's
it's
up?
a lot that's up, to be honest.
It is.
It's a lot that's up. First and foremost, last time we talked to Sheldon Anderson of Public Flower. Had a really great conversation with him. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, though, we talked to the people about your transition.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
How's it go? Let's go back there. How's it going? Girl, what you been up to?
All the things. I am busier now than I was when I was working my 9 to 5. It is a journey of entrepreneurship, like everyone said it would be. It's fun. It's exciting. It's scary.
Yeah.
All the things, but I get to take ownership of what I want life to be.
Okay.
And so ask me in about 6 months from now where I would be like, but I'm loving it. And just even being able to connect back to community. Like that's the one thing that I keep talking about is being in corporate kind of drew me out of community. And so now I'm able to go back to what I love and just connect with people and literally break bread with people, which has just made my day. So
yeah. And what I like too in our conversations is you've been very, I think, intentional in making sure that you keep a schedule, which I think is really important, right? Like when you dive into this side, people think, oh, you got all the time to do anything.
No.
But the reality is if you don't have a scheduled and like really intentional day, that can get a little helter-skelter.
And trying to also to be able to work outside of like the comforts of your home. Like you have to get out of that because otherwise I'm like, ooh, my bed looks real nice right now. You know what I mean? Like, so just being able to like just distance myself from that, but keeping that schedule of working out and then working with clients has been very helpful.
Awesome.
So,
well, maybe we can get her to come over and rent some space.
Yeah, we'll see.
Over here. We'll see about that.
Thoughts are always rolling.
We'll see about that. So we're going to dive right in.
Yes.
We have a lot to discuss, as usual. We have also toyed around with an introduction of a new segment, which, we'll kind of pilot light this time, but we're going to do a little bit more extra stuff, in the next podcast to come. So what are we calling it?
The Diversity Dispatch.
Diversity Dispatch.
Yeah, we'll have some music next week.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. Jamil gonna help us out with the sound effects. But yeah, Diversity Dispatch, and I think we've just seen what's been happening, right? Like lately, there's been a lot of conversations around the DEI space specifically. Y'all know we started this podcast for that exact reason, and so we gotta just start calling out some of the things that are happening in a more pronounced way, but then also talk about maybe measures to think about within your own organization. If you know people who are practitioners in this space, kind of giving them some insight and sharing, the podcast. We're gonna do a little deeper dive into some of that soon. So for our first Diversity Dispatch,
formerly known as Hot Topics,
right? We're gonna dive into the conversation in Alabama that's happening, right? So this article comes from NPR, and it says that Alabama governor signs ban on DEI funds that restricts divisive concepts in school and in schools, right? And so the governor, Kay Ivey, signed a bill Wednesday that bans state funding of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools, public colleges, and state agencies, joining a wave of Republican-led efforts to quash DEI initiatives. And so the new law will impose restrictions around what it calls 8 divisive concepts dealing with race and personal identity. It also requires public colleges to designate bathrooms for use by individuals based on their biological sex. Ivey signed the bill one day after the state House and Senate gave final approval to the measure SB 129. And so this is going to be taking effect on October 1st. College students who oppose the bill have organized protests against it, right? We saw a lot of that, including a large rally at the State House earlier this month. And it says that the purpose of this bill is to prevent compelled speech and indoctrination. That's based on Republican Senator Will Barfoot. He also said that when they introduced this, it was really around these divisive concepts, right? And so what does it specifically say? It goes into 8 specific areas. It says that this 9-page bill says that the sponsoring or maintaining of a DEI program or office is banned. Direct or compel a student, employee, or contractor to personally affirm, adopt, or adhere to a divisive concept. It says it requires people to, they're banning, the requirement of people to attend or participate in any DEI program or training, orientation, or coursework that advocates for or requires assent to a divisive concept. It says that it's also banning making anyone share his or her personal viewpoint on any divisive concept outside of an academic setting. It also is banning requiring students, workers, or contractors to take part in an activity that involves lobbying at the state or local level for legislation related to a divisive concept. It's also penalizing or discriminating against a student, employee, contractor because they've refused to endorse, confess, or otherwise assent to a divisive concept or diversity statement. And they specifically said that. It's also banning the use for race or color as a sole condition for enrolling in a class, training, or orientation. And then it also is banning spending their own funds or applying for or accepting a grant, federal funding, or private funding for the purpose of compelling assent to any divisive concept or any other purpose prohibited in this act, provided that such funding may be provided to student, faculty, or staff organizations or association. Now, that was a lot. That was a lot, as usual, right? But the question that they're asking is, what is a divisive concept? Right. What does that truly mean? Because we know in organizations, not even organizations, but colleges and universities, there's been a lot of conversations in the past about inviting people with different opposing viewpoints or, having folks come in and maybe not agreeing with some of the things that the college stands on by itself, but that's usually covered by free speech. In this case, they're saying that there's no specification around what divisive concepts are. It just mentions the troubling record of Alabama and the U.S. on race, such as the dehumanization of black people through enslavement and longstanding attempts to disenfranchise black voters. The way that the school teaches students about those topics has been a quote-unquote political lightning rod in recent years. And so this is another aim around critical race theory. They're trying to kind of put all these things together, but it's troubling.
It's very troubling. It's very troubling, especially as you continue to educate the next generation. Right. And something we talk about all the time is that, are they trying to just erase people from the history books? Are they trying to erase people from, just really understanding where we were as America? Because we know, like, history repeats itself, right? So you need to know where you came from. And so it is troubling. You're starting to see it in these states of Alabama, Florida, and others, Louisiana, some of these southern states, and it is based off of fear. That's what it comes down to. It's based off of fear, and it's quote unquote indoctrination.
I think about the implications of what this means, right? Like when I think about civil rights and what it took for us to have protections under, federal law, because we know that there was a lot of abuse that happened before then. And so now you have these states which are saying, no, we're not going to recognize this. We're not going to teach this, and we're not even going to teach the history of how we even got here in the first place. So now if you ban all of that, you'll just know what do you teach on the now?
Well, and a lot of times people are saying now that the Civil Rights Act is under attack, period. So you go back to even 1964, the Civil Rights Act is under attack where we are today. And they're trying to roll back a lot of legislation that was put forth back then. And so you're seeing this in legislation. So there's huge implications of, and I say this is dangerous rhetoric, It's very dangerous of what's going to happen, and the implications are going to be great.
And I mean, so I'm even looking at the article, there's a couple more areas that it says the new legislation lists 8 divisive concepts that range from the idea that any race, color, religion, sex, ethnicity, or national origin is inherently superior or inferior to the notion that any individual should accept, acknowledge, affirm, or assent to a sense of guilt, complicity, or a need to apologize on the basis of his or her race, color, religion, sex, ethnicity, or national origin. And the bill also rejects the idea that any individual is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or subconsciously, a position that runs counter to what social scientists have concluded in recent decades.
Right.
So...
And I say all the time, too, where we have to continue to be creative in these spaces, right? And so a lot of this bill is geared towards the use of, sounds like, state dollars, right? Mm-hmm. So if there are people on campus, if there's people, professors, and they want to bring in potentially someone with these type of views, maybe use their own, funding or whatever the case may be, because what I'm reading in a lot of this legislation is that it's really big on state dollars, not using state dollars. But regardless, like, we have to become creative of how we're going to continue to diversify and create these inclusive spaces.
I mean, and I think we continue to talk about this in terms of looking back to history, because we know that this isn't the first time there's been a specific attack under, a certain idea or trying to make equal footing and grounding for folks. But, it's, we live in this now. So obviously it hits different. It stings different. But at the same time, it's like, okay, this is the case, but now what?
Right.
What's the next steps? And so you heard different coaches even talking about, hey, y'all, if y'all playing sports at a certain school and this is their, they're centering this rhetoric around it. Right. I think about Alabama, like football, and how big that is, right? Maybe that's not a place that you want to be. Maybe that's not a place that reflects your values.
Exactly.
And it's easier said than done. But, I think there's going to be a lot more attention on some.
And it's going to be pushback. I mean, this is the natural reaction, right? And when you're trying to push in one direction, again, the pendulum is going to shift the other. Right. So we have to just keep pushing. And you're going to have this constant tug and pull for decades. Like, this is just what history does, right? But we just have to continue to be creative in what that looks like. And attack people at the funds, at the money. Right. So if we are pulling people and athletes out of these schools, if people are making decisions to go elsewhere, right, that is going to affect the bottom line. Right.
Ooh, so, all right, Diversity Dispatch.
Diversity Dispatch. Ooh. We got one more, though.
Okay.
One more.
Lay it on us.
So last week, there was a cargo ship named Dolly that was headed to Sri Lanka overnight, and it collided with the Francis Scott Key Bridge and ended up collapsing the bridge in the Baltimore Harbor. And so there's an article by The Hill that says, Baltimore mayor says he's ignoring the noise of DEI blame for bridge collapse. So Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott says Sunday he is brushing off the quote-unquote DEI mayor labels that began circulating after the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed last week. Shortly after the collapse of the bridge in Baltimore, social media posts circulated that attributed the incident of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. In turn, some called Scott, who is black, the quote-unquote DEI mayor, which we started seeing some of those comments, right? So last week he was on Face the Nation, and he was asked about the labels, and Scott said, quote, "Listen, I'm a young black man and a young black mayor in this country. We know that there's a lot of racism, folks who don't think I should be in the job," which I remember when he was elected, there was a lot of talk about that.
Because he's 39 years old?
Yep. So I know that. I've been black my whole life. I know how racism goes in this country, but my focus is always going to be on the people. I don't want to be out there that night answering questions about DEI. I'm worried about the loss of life, he continued. So people are concerned about the wrong thing. They're concerned that he's a quote-unquote DEI mayor. We know that, unfortunately, the lives that were lost on the bridge that night were those who were from Latino descent. And so people are saying through Twitter and other avenues that there was focused on DEI initiatives and putting people in these positions and jobs and having a DEI mayor, as opposed to really focusing on the fact that the bridge had collapsed in the Baltimore Harbor. Right. So, and
there was failure of power on
the boat
a few different times, right?
And there were people, and let's face it, there were heroes in this tragic event, right? There were people who were able to stop what was people going onto the bridge, more people going onto the bridge because there was a Mayday call and all those different things. But let's focus on that, right? The fact that people are calling him a DEI mayor, and he is ignoring the noise. He goes on to say, ignoring the noise of folks who simply want to be devices and are afraid that their way of life, where people that don't look like them and think like them can be controlled, can be in power and actually be better at the job. Right. And so, again, it's this rhetoric, this dangerous rhetoric of fear that anything that's other is not capable of doing the job or task at hand.
I mean, the crazy piece in that same article, it says that Scott argued that these critics don't have the courage to say the N-word, and said the remarks should not even be in the conversation, right? And I think that goes back to what we've been talking about. Of course, on Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter, there's been a lot of conversations, and the hashtag DEI was trending over the weekend, right? Where people were reclaiming the DEI notion and sticking it into different ideals and concepts,
right?
For lack of better words, right? Because people are saying, instead of using the N-word, whereas people might have used in the past, now they're saying DEI.
Exactly.
There's also a notion around a new type of way that people are understanding DEI, and they're saying didn't earn it.
Yep.
So did not earn it.
Right.
Didn't earn it.
Exactly.
Is what DEI stands for to some people, right? Which is so interesting in itself, because I think the same notion that we're reading and hearing about these same people, and we talked about it, right? We're not saying didn't earn it when it comes to legacy admissions within these schools.
Yep.
We're not saying didn't earn it when your old friend can call and get you a job opportunity because they know and have a relationship. We talk about the network gap all the time.
Yep.
In more affluent neighborhoods, you don't have this gap in terms of this network. So people can have those type of relationships and dynamics. I had an old boss who said the same thing. Hey, Kua, how would you get, one of your friends a job or a family member a job? And we, look what's out there. We apply online. Well, and he said, for me, I just call up a buddy, and this was a white man who said that and was very clear in what that looked like.
Right.
But when you think about didn't earn it, who are we really talking about?
Right.
Who are we really talking about?
Right. And so you're seeing this, right, that where they are replacing it with, or seemingly replacing it with the N-word, but it's something that we talked about 2 episodes ago, right, where people are seeing DEI is replacing it with black, DEI replacing it with critical race theory, all these different things. And so they're co-opting the language and turning and spinning it into fear.
Right.
And that's what's happening. It's like, people are placating us on fear.
And I think, the Boeing conversation, right? When the door flew off because of a mechanical error, they scoured, I think, their website and saw a statement around DEI, and now they hold on to that and say, oh my gosh, if they weren't so focused on DEI and put so much money and attention over here, maybe the door wouldn't have flown off.
Right.
Right.
But we know that obviously that's not to be true.
Right.
But it's just, it's so funny going back to the top of what we were talking about, the diversity dispatch. These are the things that are happening and sounding the alarm.
Yeah.
And something I said earlier is that 2024 seems heavier than 2020 in many ways, because a lot of this rhetoric is seemingly okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And people are okay with it. And it almost feels like you're in a fight for your life. Every single day.
Every day.
Yeah.
And I think the wearing of that on a person, like, it's keeping the North Star ultimately. Yeah. We know that, like I said, this is not new. These attacks have been going on. These dog whistles have been going on. It's funny because I had to think about what dog whistle really meant.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I mean, you're a dog owner.
Yeah, I am. Mellow.
So, even in that, this is a whistle that only a dog can hear, right?
Yes.
And so there's things that are happening around a table. For instance, a conversation that's happening. If you pick up on it, you pick up on it.
Yes.
Right? And so in this nature of this work, even hearing this didn't earn it, or, we're going to say DEI, the pilot that was flying is a woman of color, so she must not be as qualified. And I think that's the other piece that is frustrating as well. When it's not, a dominant cultural norm, it automatically is discounted as being qualified, because that's always the conversation. And we've had this conversation many times, but it's a lot.
It is a lot. It's heavy.
It is heavy.
It's heavy, but we got to continue to fight the good fight.
Whew, okay.
With tactics.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about these tactics because we need to, circle around on some of those.
Yeah. So.
All
right, so that was Diversity Dispatch. So we have the actual content of what we wanted to talk about today, and we could go on and on and on. But so, Kua and I have been watching and following the NCAA basketball.
March Madness.
Yeah. This is, I always say Christmas in March is the best time.
It really is.
It's just basketball galore. So we talked about March Madness last year on the women's side. And so we see every year that women's play is constantly being elevated. But also too constantly under scrutiny,
right,
as it continues to be elevated.
Yeah.
And so last year, we had a conversation about LSU and Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, which are two phenomenal, dynamic players in their own right.
Yeah.
And we talked about some of the things that Angel Reese was under attack for last year, some of her gestures of pointing at her hand, saying that she got the ring and the title, right?
Yep.
And doing this to Caitlin Clark because Caitlin Clark did it first, you know. And that's what happens in sports, right? It is a battle. It's trash talking. It's a battle, right? Yeah. It happens all the time.
Yep.
And so that was some of the rhetoric last year. And then this year, right, we saw most recently, as of yesterday, another dynamic battle between the two.
Oh, my gosh.
Where Iowa actually came on top this time as opposed to LSU.
Yeah.
And there were some things that
How many threes did Caitlin Clark hit? Like
9 or 10. Like 9 or 10 threes.
Behind the 3-point, like insane shots that she was making back to back. In the beginning, you know, it was a great game, right? In the beginning, they hit a run at the first part of the game, and they were going strong. And, you know, they called that timeout. We were laughing because we were like, I wonder what Mulkey said to them, because automatically they came back and was like, all right, you know, they tied the game and then led at one point. But then Caitlin in these threes, she couldn't be stopped.
She is, I mean, she's
has
a
all
beast. She's a beast. I mean, she's breaking records almost on a daily basis at this point.
Right.
So it's really interesting to see in the last couple of games how well Iowa does. But yeah, so Iowa came on top yesterday, and there were a few things that came out of that game. So so with LSU losing, obviously they're done for the season, and there's talks whether if Angel Reese is going to go to the WNBA or not and declare for the draft. But during the press conference, it was a very powerful press conference. And you saw where Angel Reese, as well as her teammate Flau'jae Johnson, they were being interviewed. And one thing that was very sentimental to me and powerful is that, and we're going to talk about what Angel Reese talked about in a moment, but Flau'jae wiped her tears. Right? Yeah. And it's so powerful because Angel Reese comes into spaces and she is herself every single time, right? She does not bow down to anyone. She's confident. And she does the same things that everyone else does. Right. But you could tell she had a look of she was tired. She was tired, right? She's tired from the constant criticism that she gets. She is tired from death threats that she's gotten over time, right, since winning the championship last year, and just getting the negative press that some of these other players are not getting. And seeing where her teammate Johnson was able just to wipe her tears was a very powerful moment at that moment.
And I mean, this is coming also on the heels of an article that came out in the LA Times, which since the person who wrote that article has since apologized. But the title of that article was like America's Sweethearts versus, what was it?
Dirty America's Sweethearts and the Basketball Villains.
Well, the Basketball Villains, but they changed that
Dirty
title.
Debutantes.
It was a Dirty Debutantes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so this whole nature, and, you know, now that it's cleaned up a little bit and talking about, the villains, you know, in this case, but it was originally Dirty Debutantes.
Right.
And that took us back to
Don Imus back in...
What year was that?
2007 or 8. So this is when I was still playing college basketball, because I took it personal too, because I'm like, you're coming at all black basketball players. And this is when Don Imus, who was a radio host at the time, called the ladies of Temple, who Don Staley was the coach at the time, nappy-headed hoes. Right? And so this is very reminiscent of what happened back then. Right. And so you're seeing this, and the fact that the article was cleaned up, it's like, did you not understand the implications of when you were writing it?
Well, he says he didn't. Right. And I think there's a couple notions in this article, because we read it. Right. And in the article, he talks about this notion of Kim Mulkey as the coach. And there was going to be an article that came out in, was it the Washington Post?
Washington Post, yep.
Where they were going to be coming at her and basically attacking her character as a coach. And there was, you know, some things that were happening. She had came out in the media and said, listen, there was supposed to be this article. Y'all keep playing with me. I'm a sue at some point because this is defamation. You're trying to come at my character.
Right.
And everybody was just like, oh, where did this come from, right? Because I guess this has been an article in the making for the last couple years, and they've been trying to get a comment from her for a while. And so that was happening. So he mentions this in the LA Times article, where it's like, you know, you got this coach who brought all this attention on herself because she made a notion of this this larger piece that was coming out, but
Right.
wouldn't go into details. And people kept asking her, and she said, I'm just focused on the game. I'm not going to get into that.
Right.
And so he chastises her in the article to say,
Yep.
you're saying all this, but you're not coming out with it. Then it goes on to talk about, there's a line in there around Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. And he mentions that last year, here you got one of the dirty debutantes that he's mentioning, pointing to her ring finger saying,
right.
I got that chip, I won, and mocking her with a hand gesture. But in the same sentence, it says that Caitlin Clark did to her first.
Right.
But you're not coming at Caitlin Clark in the same way.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And so it's this positioning.
It's the positioning, and it's inherently it's racist. It's flat out racist, right? And then also, too, one thing that I do want to point out, too, in the article, it said, this is one line when they were talking about, so what they were saying was America's Sweethearts was UCLA's team, basketball team. And this is what he said. Then there's UCLA, which operates in the saintly shadows while being a wholesome as a miniature stuffed Bruin mascot. Right? And also, too, he goes on to say that so he goes on to talk about and refers to the players as dirty debutantes. And then he says, do you prefer the team that wants to grow women's basketball or the one seemingly hell-bent on dividing it? And so, again, it's this comparison of good versus evil as well, right?
And especially in this time right now.
Yep.
We're talking about all this, this quote-unquote divisive concepts of just trying to learn what history has, where it's been and what it's taught us to this point. Right. You got all this in the background that's currently happening. You got a presidential election that's currently happening and people talking about this side versus that side. Right. So good versus evil in this sense, these are teenagers for a lot of them.
They are.
Yeah. Teenagers.
Yeah.
They're early 20s, maybe.
Right.
College students.
And I will say this, one thing that is promising, right? So going back to all these things that's happening in academia and attacking DEI, one thing that is promising and something that I love to see is that many of these basketball players are not falling into that. So Caitlin Clark is not falling into this rhetoric. She is respecting Angel Reese, and Angel Reese is respecting her.
Absolutely.
And even, was it 2 years ago, when you had, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank of her name, from UConn. Why am I drawing a blank of her name?
On the UConn team?
On the UConn
currently?
Yes. My goodness. I'm drawing a huge blank right now, and I should know this.
You'll remember it.
But, a couple years ago when she won an award through the ESPYs, I believe, for UConn players, she talked about how black players are, when they are put on the platform, that they're villainized. They don't get the same publicity as some of the white players. And it just goes to show how media, again, is trying to create this. But one thing, like I keep saying, is what I love is seeing that these players, the white players, are speaking out against what they're seeing. Right. Because once this article came out, LSU players said, whoa, wait a minute. Yes, we have predominantly black people on this team, or black players on this team. And this is wrong for what you're saying, right? Kim Mulkey spoke out about it. So as much as we're seeing that colleges are saying, like, take away DEI, we're seeing people stick up and be allies on this at the same time, which is also promising in a way.
Sure. I mean, it's more than annoying. I think it's highly frustrating that even has to be the case. But it just goes to show, we got a lot of work to do. And that it keeps highlighting that. Ben Bolch, who wrote the article for LA Times, he came out with an apology, and it says, "It has taken me 2 days to write this apology because I wanted to be as thoughtful as possible in my response to the situation I have created. These are words I have not been asked to write by anyone at my paper, but they need to be expressed so that I can own up to my mistake. Words matter. As a journalist, no one should know this more than me, yet I have failed miserably in my choice of words because in my column previewing the LSU-UCLA women's basketball game, I try to be clever in my phrasing about one team's attitude, using alliteration while not understanding the deeply offensive connotation or associations. I also use metaphors that were not appropriate. Our society has had to deal with so many layers of misogyny, racism, and negativity that I can now see why my words were wrong. It was not my intent to be hurtful, but I now understand that I was terribly now I understand that I terribly missed the mark. I sincerely apologize to the LSU and UCLA basketball teams and to our readers. UCLA is a school that I've covered for nearly a decade, champions diversity, and is known as a leader in inclusivity. However, I have not upheld that standard in what I wrote, and I will do much better. I'm deeply sorry.
If you could see my face now as you're reading that.
I see your face.
There's so much. Paige Beckers is who's I was thinking about from UConn, who spoke out. But this is why it is so important to continue to educate people in this space, especially those who are writers and journalists who have power in the pen, right? And so again, going back to so many colleges, universities, where you're supposed to educate people on why words are harmful,
right?
Why words matter, why this intrinsically is awful, but why it goes back to just connotations from back in the day, right?
Yeah.
This is why it's so important. And so you want to pull this back, but yet this is happening at the same time. Yeah. Right. And for me, the reason why he issued the apology is because he saw the backlash from.
He got called out. And it was clear. I mean, if you call anybody, what is it? The America's Sweethearts
and Dirty Debutantes. It's. I mean, I don't even have any words. I'm actually lost for words.
Yeah.
Just keep hearing it. I'm actually lost for words.
I mean, and he talks about alliteration and being cute and cheeky with his words. But at the end of the day, you know, I hope his apology is sincere. I do hope that. I think that people apologize for a couple different reasons. Right. One, you really do understand, you know. Two, it's you being called out from people. And so I do hope that he's sincere in his apology. But I can tell you, and you know, we've had this conversation many times where I said I'd be in the comments, and I try not to be in the comments all the time because we know how hurtful those comments can be. But you're seeing the continued, you know, divisiveness that's happening in this country.
Yes,
where people are commenting, oh, you know, so you reference the conversation that they had after the game yesterday, the press conference, where Flau'jae is, you know, consoling Angel Reese. Angel Reese is talking about how difficult it's been and how she feels like this weight is on her shoulders. And then you see people in the comments, oh, cry me a river, you know, you lost, get over it, you suck, you're this, you're that, and people like really trying to tear her down in that way. But I don't know. I think you're seeing this divisiveness because this good versus evil is a conversation that continuously is perpetuated in politics right now, in society right now. You know, there's not many spaces where you can even have a disagreement.
No.
You know, we talked about cancel culture and not even being able to have these conversations. And I honestly think some of that has led to where we are now.
Yeah.
We don't have meaningful dialogue any longer.
We don't.
Right?
You can't, because people are going to, again, cancel you for having meaningful dialogue. And I think it's important to have opposing views, right? As long as you're not offending people, right? But, you know, going back to even with Angel Reese, the fact that she's 21 years old, right? And she has to deal with this. And I say this all the time, even when I was in education, is that that women, or not even women, but kids of color have to grow up so much quicker than their counterparts, right? And so these are lessons learned that we learned when we were younger, right? How heavy the world is. And unfortunately, it's like this continues to happen. And I also say this too, right? As Americans, and we talk about dominant culture, one thing that we love is football and basketball, right? And baseball. But, you know, and think about 2020 when the world stopped, and how literally at the NBA level, how the teams did not come out, and how it just had a wave of just effect throughout all of the professional sports, right? And so we're seeing even on the women's side where the viewership is going up, you know, the amount of money being invested in NCAA on both men and women's side, and it's literally like millions and millions of dollars. NIL deals and all these different things. And so there's power in that.
Right.
And so maybe, you know, we can start to utilize some of that and their power to speak out against that. We saw it happen in 2020. Right. But, you know, seeing her in crying, and it wasn't tears of we lost.
Right. It wasn't because that point.
If it was tears of we lost, she would have cried when she fouled out.
Right.
It was tears of I'm tired, and maybe for a moment I get to rest.
Yeah. But, you know, I think we often talk about who gets the benefit being tired? Who gets the benefit of, being on that opposite end? And I think it makes me think about a lot of different conversations, right? Like, people always want to oppose different things too. So even the notion of like Beyonce and Taylor Swift, there's a lot of conversations that even came out around that. Who's allowed to be in certain spaces? Who's allowed to take up space? Who's allowed to, be something that you quote unquote can't be?
Yeah.
I mean, I won't get into the whole ordeal. Cowboy Carter just came out, right?
There's a lot of conversation around that.
A lot of conversations around that, and bending different genres and being in spaces and thinking about it from a historical lens. But there's so many notions around that and how people take up for certain people. But usually, if you're a person of color, you just don't have that benefit of the doubt.
Right.
You don't.
You just gotta live through it.
You just exist through it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what you learn as a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I learned growing up, is that you just live through it and you push through.
Right.
Right. You don't complain about it. This is what it is.
How tiring is that?
Just saying out loud.
How tiring is that?
But this is why we keep talking about self-care. We talk about, making sure you have your
self-care is not enough.
I know.
For that space. Like, if we're being real.
That's true.
We're both entrepreneurs.
Oof.
We're both our own boss at this point in time. And so I think we've even challenged ourselves about getting deeper on the podcast because we can.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about
the corporate shackles.
of, not being able to say what you want to say, but it's tiring.
It's
tiring. I mean, I know it plays out in many different cases and scenarios, being a businesswoman of color and what that looks like and how people approach you, and how they accept you or don't, right? Like there's different notions that we can tie into this conversation, but it is exhausting.
It's very exhausting.
And just imagine how much you could do with that time and energy if you didn't have to focus it there.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and I think, that to your point about, diving deeper, I think we have to continue to dive deeper because, again, like, there's days, and I'll speak for myself, where I feel like I'm in a fight for my life, right? And I owe it to myself. I owe it to my future kids, right, to continue to almost fight this battle, which is sad to say that we have to do.
Yeah.
But we need more people, and I don't even like to use the word allyship anymore, like, because allyship is not strong enough.
Yeah.
Right. We need people who are willing to go toe to toe.
Absolutely.
Who are willing to speak up, who are willing to give opportunities, who are willing to dismantle systems, and not have it be tied into any money and incentives. Right. Which that's an idea that's utopia. I don't think it ever exists.
Sure.
But we need people who literally are willing to be knocked down, right, and fall down with me.
Yeah.
Right.
Ooh, I gotta be on the faith side. I gotta build up the faith because it's hard when you see this. And the reality is we don't have any other choice. And so I'll just say that. But it's hard when you're living this day to day, and it just seems bleaker and bleaker every single day. You see, that's why we're talking about this diversity dispatch, because literally every week it seems like there's another bill that's being,
it's going to be.
Right.
It's going to be. It's 2024. It's going to be.
It's going to be. And this is the year that we're going to see a lot of this. So, we got a lot to say about a lot of things.
We do.
And we'll continue to have that conversation. But I think ultimately, we got to keep our eye on the prize.
Yeah.
And that's all we can leave you with today, y'all.
I know. It seems so heavy.
It does seem heavy.
So heavy.
So,
all right. Well, I guess gem of the day.
Gem.
Woo, gem.
What you got?
I don't know. I just feel like it's just very, very heavy. Normally we talk about self-care. We talk about all these different things. Yeah. But it's kind of deviating from the gym. But back to what I was saying before is like, if you're listening to our podcast, and we know there's a lot of y'all listening because we talk about it all the time and say how, you've taken something from our podcast. But, we need people who are willing to go toe to toe, people who are willing to be in this battle, because it's going to be a battle. It is a battle. It's hard work. We need people who are willing to dismantle systems and get out of the way, right? Get out of the way. Stop being gatekeepers, and that's a lot of folks.
That's a good one.
A lot of folks. We're not even necessarily talking about from a racial perspective, but we have a lot of people who are gatekeepers. Get out of the way, and then those who are willing to go toe to toe, be able to go to battle, and then get out of the way when it's necessary.
Okay.
So that's I don't know. I have the boxing gloves on right now.
I see. I'm with you on that. I think my gem is going to touch on a little bit of what we talked about today, which is that opposing viewpoint, right? Like, and that other side, you know, we talk about this good versus evil, but I think we need to dismantle even, you know, some of those types of labels. Obviously, they're not helpful, but I think we need to start having more dialogues and conversations around topics with people who don't necessarily agree with you.
Yeah.
I think I want to challenge us.
We talked about this.
We talked about this too, inviting somebody that has an opposing view to what we talk about on the podcast. If you're out there and you have an opposing view, we're welcome you. You know, hit us up for real, because we want to have that discussion and maybe just model what it looks like to have that discussion with someone that does not agree with what you're talking about. Because this is a day and age right now where if you don't agree with me, you're dead to me.
Right.
And I just keep you at arm's length. Right. And I think we need to start having more conversations around, why do you feel that way? Right. You know, where is that coming from? Where's that position coming from? So we can have a better understanding even of people that don't agree. Like, we're obviously not having all these anti-DEI bills and legislation for nothing.
Exactly.
So where's that coming from? Right. Now, I have my own ideas of what that looks like and why that's the case. But hey, maybe we need to have a discussion with somebody who feels that way.
Yeah. Put on a whole armor.
I have to put on the armor too, but we'll have to talk about that.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
If and when we can make that happen.
Right.
So
definitely let us know again, like, if there's any conversations you guys want to talk about. Yeah. But we'll continue to come to you with our diversity dispatch with some real sound effects.
Jamil gonna hook us up.
Yes. Yeah. But so we have another episode in the books.
Another one in the books.
Yeah.
We'll see y'all next time.
All right. Bye. Cool.
Peace.